committee hearings for fiscal year 2018-2019 for the operating budget. Today is Wednesday, May 9th. To the audience, viewers, Metro department heads and personnel, budget and finance committee members, and Metro Council members, I thank you for being here. I also want to take this opportunity to publicly thank the Director of Finance, Ms. Lomax O'Neill, and her team, council staff for working diligently to ensure we had our materials. Remember, today we'll be discussing the operating budget only per rule. In consideration of time, Budget and Finance Committee members will be recognized first. If there are additional questions, other council members will be recognized as time permitting. If there are additional questions that exceed the allotted time that we have for today, council members are encouraged to send those questions to Danielle, copying myself, Mr. Jameson, with operating budget and the subject line for the respective department. We will be utilizing a SharePoint repository this budgetary cycle so that all of us can be on one accord as it relates to questions that's submitted to various departments and those answers. With that said, our first department would be the mayor's office. Go ahead and come on up. I believe we have Ms. Dale. I'll give you a second to get settled. And in prior years, you would have been asked a different question, but considering the budgetary constraints that we have this year, with the understanding of the status quo recommended budget, can you provide what that entails for the operation of your department? And just for the viewing audience, can you provide a brief synopsis of the services that your office provides for the city? And the floor is yours, Ms. Dale.
Well, first of all, let me say thank you, Council Lady Vercher and members of the council that are here. Debbie Dale Mason, Chief of Staff. With me is Donna Foster, who's a finance administrator with the finance department and works our liaison to that department. Also, there are many members of the mayor's office staff here in the back and up front. I know you all know probably all of them and work with them. So again, thank you for that working relationship. I'm glad to be here for the opportunity to share the mayor's office budget with you. Let me begin by saying that this year's budget, like last year's budget, is a status quo budget. No improvements are being requested. Our budget will continue staff focus on the issues important to you and those we serve, and building upon the foundational work that has occurred the last 2 years that we have been in that office. I know you know all the issues that we're all working on are big, complex, and interrelated. We will continue with the number of employees we have had the last 2 years. We leverage staff policy work with interns throughout the year, as well as we house MDHA's AmeriCorps Vistas who work with our staff on issues within the Promise Zone and those 6 subzones. So we try to leverage the work that we have on the issues. We also work hard to leverage partnerships and relationships with local, state, and federal entities and partnerships that support that work. So I'm going to very quickly go over some of the highlights that we look at the policy work that our staff will be focused on within the budget that Mayor Briley did present. Obviously, a top priority is education and youth. Our education staff will continue to work on public education and post-secondary attainment. I know Shannon Hall was here earlier this week and talked about the work that we co-opt on working for education fairs for employees. We're also working, planning to work with employees on GED support, so we're very excited about that. We're going to continue our focus on early childhood education and success and tools for providers and parents, including the pre-K coordinated portal that the mayor did include in the budget. Obviously, a program that I know you all know well is Opportunity Now, the Youth Summer Program. We are on track for this summer. A great number of youth are still enrolling. Ronnie Stein asked me to share with you that at the first of next week he'll have an update on Opportunity Now, but it's a very exciting program that obviously has already changed lives in the 1 year that it's been out there. We also will be focusing on youth violence reduction. We're going to reinstitute that task force as we will be updating the Children and Youth Master Plan. And then we continue to work with the Mayor's Youth Council. I know many of you all are aware of the work that I think it's a group of 40 young people that are from a variety of schools throughout Davidson County. In transit, as the mayor said last week, our office will work with the community to see what we can do to come to consensus on what can be done to address mobility in the city and in our region. We were pleased with one thing that has recently been launched is the Metro's new Walk Bike Status Tracker, which is an online public information portal. So our staff will continue working with those tools, seeing how we can connect people to those issues. In housing, again, another big issue, all this is there. We'll continue working with you, members of the council, to build housing stock with Metro tools such as the Community Land Trust, resources, and Metro properties through the Barnes Fund. And again, the support that you all have shown the Barnes Fund and the work it has done continues to be a big priority for the mayor's office. You might have seen today that our office just announced, along with the Center for Nonprofit Management, that applications are open for a second annual Affordable Housing Catalyst, which is a collaborative program with the Center for Nonprofit Management. This program provides training to potential nonprofit developers that seek Barnes funding. This is a way to build capacity within those organizations to be able to apply for those funds. The program launched last year, and I think this is a really great statistic. There was an increased minority and women-led organizations participating in that grant process. It went from less than 15% of applications in 2016 to more than 69% to date. It also doubled the number of nonprofit participants in the Barnes Fund, which I think says a lot about not only the needs in the program and those who work within that area. We continue a focus on community engagement and transparency, working through our Office of Neighborhoods and Community Engagement. Will be focused on increased community engagement. You all have seen, have been at many of the town halls that have recently been held, and we plan to have more of those throughout the year to connect. Hub Nashville, I know many of you have been involved in that. Your office is very connected to Hub Nashville. I think there have been 60,000 cases over, I think, the last year, people connecting to get information on issues or problems they might have. And I also know the resident survey, Brian Kelsey was up here recently to brief the council on that survey and the priorities of that were coming in from the community. Diversity, inclusion, and equity. As you all know, Ashford Hughes is the newly appointed let me get that, CDEIO, which is the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer. He'll be working with Shannon Hall, Michelle Lane, continued focus on workforce and workplace here in Metro, and procurement processes that reflect, obviously, a commitment to diversity and pathways for increased participation in those processes. We were pleased that in the last few months we've had about 200 leaders and reps attend doing business with Metro sessions. Some of you might have attended that. Listening sessions, a way to get input that we can build on as that process continues. And obviously, I know many of you were there when the mayor announced the Minority Business Council that is charged with submitting an annual report outlining the challenges and opportunities for minority business growth. We also continue to outreach to new American populations through our Office of New Americans. Matt Wilshire, talking about economic development, he will be following me a little bit later this afternoon to talk about more details of what we're doing in economic development, but obviously a focus on equity and economic development, focus on small businesses with resources and tools. And one of the, I think, great programs we do is based on economic inclusion. Many of you are aware of the Financial Empowerment Center. It's a partnership we have with United Way. This is a program that since 2013 has helped reduce individual debt by over $7 million. That program is in the mayor's office, in the mayor's budget to continue. We'll also be looking at some consumer protection issues that need to be addressed. And then obviously, FEC works closely with Opportunity Now and the youth, getting them on the right path. Last year, I know for many of them, they opened checking accounts for the first time, so that was a great partnership. Resilience, I'll just say we hate to see Jen and Eric Cole leave Nashville for probably a place that may be as warmer than where we are today in Arizona. But we are pleased that with his leadership that the Office of Resilience has worked. That's an initiative we have with 100 Resilient Cities, has connected with over 5,000 people and received input that staff will now shape into an overall preparedness plan that addresses shocks and stresses in our community. And last, health and wellness, that is something that policy work addresses or interacts with so many of the issues that we're all addressing. The mayor recently announced the Behavioral Health and Wellness Council that will advise the mayor in setting priorities around issues of behavioral health, mental illness, and substance abuse. We also are working with the task force on ending the epidemic. With over 4,000 Nashvillians living with HIV, this task force is dedicated to improving access to care and services for those living with HIV and expanding prevention strategies. So these are, it seems, more than just a few highlights, but this is what you all also do every day as a body, the issues that you're focused on. So wanted to share some of that. I know that I will say this for all the staff and the mayor. We look forward to working with you on these issues, just continued relationships. And obviously we'll be working with you individually, I know in your districts, as well as a body. So just wanted to share that with you. And now.
Thank you so much, Ms. Dale. Vice Chair Schulman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Mason, I guess when I was just looking at the budget, this looks basically, the numbers and the employees look exactly the same as we had last year under then Mayor Berry, right? So this is basically
yes.
the exact same thing that we had.
Right.
So I know that several years ago the numbers went up, but nothing really has changed in this, except for maybe one employee, and that's the Chief Strategy Officer, and that budget position's being moved over here.
Right, and let me say, I think from what I understand, under Mayor Dean, the office was a 30-member staff, and I think of course, at the end of that administration, it was less than that because of just change. We have the two positions. We went from 30 to 32. One was Brian Kelsey, the Chief Strategy Officer, which was funded in the PIP and PIP process and with finance, and has been moved in with us. We also have a relationship with the Metro Health Department for Kristen Zach, who's the Senior Advisor for Health and Wellness. So that's the two addition.
And then I guess my one last question was, I know that with the Office of Resiliency, sounds like they've done their surveys. Without jumping the gun, can you tell us specifically what specific areas they're going to be focused on in terms of dealing with Nashville and things that we have to recover from?
I would probably defer that to Eric. Can I do that, Council Lady?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Eric, would you like to?
Yeah, as long as it doesn't deviate too far. I know it's part of this budget.
Right.
I'm just interested.
Yeah. And this is Eric Cole, who is
We
our
all need to
director.
hear.
Oh, good. That's right.
Thank you, Councilman and Debbie Dale. The biggest shocks and stresses that we identified related to the resilience analysis, what's called a preliminary resilience assessment, are not going to be a shock and a surprise, but water-related flooding, both tributary flooding as well as river flooding, because of basically an increased amount of precipitation that falls on Nashville pretty regularly, were our top two. Straight line winds, storms, tornadoes, followed by the one that stood out that I think we're all aware of because of the events in Atlanta, was the increase in our concern around cyber attack, both the government and community level. And then because of Nashville's preponderance of, entertainment events, outdoor events, a lot of heightened concern, but a lot of heightened preparation around public event preparedness, et cetera. And the state and local authorities, I think, are very prepared in that regard, but it's just something we have to keep in mind. On the long-term shocks and stresses, infrastructure and transportation, decreasing supply of affordable housing, as well as I think concerns about how the land use process works and how people understand the land use process were probably the top three things that came in that finding.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice
Thank you.
Chair. Councilman Cooper.
Thank you, and thank you, Debbie Dale. Thank you, Chairman. A couple of questions. If in the status quo budget presentation, I think the community's interested in a series of these questions. Clearly, last year, the mayor's office, there were a lot of transit-related expenses, and so why would we have a status quo budget if you had a whole lot of expense behind transit-related expenses last year? If this is a true scenario, why wouldn't we tend to trend down because we no longer have that kind of cost?
If you're talking about the staff commitment to those issues, I think the work continues. It may have been
Okay.
focused on, obviously, the Let's Move Nashville plan. Our Transportation Sustainability Office focuses on those two issues. So there's, environmental as well as transportation issues. So the work continues. So I don't think it was that there was the issues were being addressed, were needing to be addressed anyway. And so I think what came out of the work this year obviously will help inform the next steps that have to be done.
Okay, and so Public Works would have had most of the expense in Let's Move Nashville last year. It wouldn't have been in the mayor's office.
I'm talking more about the policy work that we did internally. I know Public Works and other departments, MTA, would have had budgets perhaps relating to something.
Okay.
If I'm not answering right, let me know and I'll
Well,
get what you need.
Thank you. And again, all these questions are somewhat related in terms of what's mayoral office expenses and then what is out in the rest of the department. So generally, expenses, security, that's not a mayoral office expense?
No, I think from what I understand, the only expense that we have for security would be the travel that we pay that would be associated with security. But yes, from what I understand, that's totally a police department. I should know that.
So famously, this is another case where that's another departmental expense, but is really warranted by the mayor's office.
Right.
Would be that, okay. And so then famously, the approval of expenses by another department by the mayor's office, how does that happen?
I'll be honest, I think approving that's in the budget. That's the budget that's presented. I don't know that there is no day-to-day approval of what is done, of course, in other departments related to these issues, because we are there, I think, truly as a policy. Our staff is there as policy, working on these issues that the mayor's, has as priorities. The only outright expense that I know that we would have approved would have been any travel associated that was needed for the mayor, but we were not approving anything that would be a day-to-day operation of any other department.
So security would be part of the police department's budget and not the mayoral budget?
I've looked to that. That's true, from what I understand. Right.
And overtime would not be approved by the mayoral budget? Famously, we're going back to some of this spring about understanding this exactly. Within the context of a status quo budget, these are, I think, kind of community questions of how can that, how is that status quo if you're not having some of the expenses that you had last year?
I think any travel, we would work within any travel budget we had, for example. The only thing that really came out of our budget for security was travel, and that would have been we would have still worked within our budget. We're going to work within an existing budget.
Because most people would assume that travel would be coming down and overtime would be coming down, probably on a year-to-year comparison. Now, some staff from the mayor's office has moved over to other departments, clearly. I guess Codes has picked up a public information officer.
Right, Sean, through the Codes Department.
Is everyone in the mayor's office civil service, or is anybody in the mayor's office civil service?
Well, I think we are not civil service. I think there are employees who would have been perhaps with Metro that took leave from civil service to come into the mayor's office. And I looked to see if there's anything here I need to be adding, but we don't have any we're not civil service employees.
So none of the 32 are, were, or in the past have been civil
Well,
service?
they have in the past.
But not while they're serving. They give that up.
They would have to take a leave to come work in the mayor's office.
And so a leave that ends when the leave is up? So you take a specific leave to work in the mayor's office and then you go back to being civil service, or do you have to give that
From
up?
what I understand, you can go back to that position or to that department when you go back to taking civil service, it becomes active again.
Okay. And then the professional services budget, I know that's almost $400,000. What are the professional services purchasing?
Donna, does it, okay.
The microphone is on.
Okay. 250,000 of it is for the Financial Empowerment Center that's granted to United Way to manage the financial empowerment centers.
And what's the rest of it?
Like management consultant, temp services.
And we can, if we need to get some more information.
And so this is, but all of the ancillary services would be on that line item. So the management consulting, any management consultant that you used would be in that line item on that. Okay. And you'll share with us what that budget is expected to be.
Be glad to.
Okay. All right. So the transit-related expenses, you're saying you're really not having any different expenses, so there are no savings there. They're not anticipating any savings in travel or overtime. Again, all these questions are related back to the status quo nature, and are there any
Did I
savings?
say overtime, you mean from security or?
Will this past fiscal year to the next fiscal year that you're anticipating the same level of travel and overtime last fiscal year to this coming fiscal
Well,
year?
overtime by our staff or?
Well, again, you're saying all that is billable back to the
Right.
police department.
Right. The only thing
Okay.
that we would pay out of our budget is any travel that the mayor would need.
Okay.
We would cover, we would approve those travel expenses and pay for those in our budget. And so that's a call, is any request
Okay.
made of the mayor.
Well, so maybe the easiest way, and I'm grateful for your time, is if you would provide other departmental expenses which are, however, authorized by the mayor's office and for the benefit of the mayor's office. So say there was a consultant that was hired by Public Works, but that was authorized and hired by the mayor's office, so that you see kind of the unified management cost space here in the city.
Right.
That it may be billed with another group. And again, I think the police department overtime, for example, is a solid example, or the security service is a solid example of where it is for this office, but in fact the billing ends up being through another department.
I'll be glad to see what we have on.
And what that cumulative number is and what that number is over time, I'd be very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Cooper. Councilman Glover.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Mason, none of this is going to catch you by surprise because you know I do numbers. That's what I do.
I know you do.
So I've listened to the state of Metro for the last several years, and I listened to the one this past week, and we talk about top priorities being public safety and education. So I went back and I looked at a number of issues over the past several years, and it's always been the same priorities. But let me break down some numbers, if I may, for you.
All right.
Arts. This is an increase from 2013 to the proposed budget for this year. Increase of 47.2%. Mayor's office, increase of 46.49%. Transit, 28.9%. MPS and the council, 25%. Police, 20%. Parks, 19%. Finance, 16.25%. Fire, 13%. Public Works, 4.7%. And legal, 17%. I'm having a challenge trying to understand how we're defining what I define as a priority versus what might be defined as a priority by the executive branch. So can you help me understand that with the budget over the last several years? And of course, we say this one's status quo, but I have to agree. We move numbers around. We move inside on how we budget things. And it makes it very challenging. So what I did was I simply took the top line and compared 2013, the proposed budget for this year. Because that's the best apples to apples I can compare. Because it's dollar for dollar. It's not personnel to personnel. It's literally just dollar for dollar. So I'm trying to understand, how is it that, because believe me, you know the emails we're getting here on the promise of the cost of living adjustment, okay? And I will tell you, from my standpoint, I won't speak for anybody else, but from my standpoint, I'm working diligently to try to figure out how to do that. I disagree. I think there are, if we change our priorities around a little bit on the floor here, I think we can accomplish some of that. And so I would just like to hear, from a standpoint of when we say status quo, how is it, and when the priorities are the same year after year after year, why do we have such a variance in the percentages?
And I will share, I know that Mayor Briley talked to you all when this process launched and talked about the budget, and I think has that broader view of the budget. I'm not sure what figures, and not having you share figures, and I know you look at figures, if there are figures that we need to look at to see if there is a response to understand what those percentages are and that impact upon what you are asking, we are glad to do. I'm not a Steve Glover. I can sit up here and go through the figures like you and try to respond to something that I haven't seen, but we'd be glad to. But I do know I know the mayor, as he said earlier this week, this isn't a budget that he really wanted to present, thought, his priorities, he didn't feel he could also reach with this budget, but glad to look at any of that and get back with you. Obviously, I think the priorities are there. I think it's just, and, I can speak here from a status quo budget for our office. Something bigger, I would want to make sure that I gave you the correct or appropriate answer.
And it's challenging asking you these questions because the budget originates out of the mayor's office, then it comes to us. And then, we deal with it. Once it's handed off to us, we deal with it. The one thing that did bother me, I heard a speech that was given, I don't know, the last couple of days, that, the council didn't really say anything about warning of where we are right now with regards to the budget. I'm pretty certain last year there were several of us on the floor that warned we were going to be exactly where we are right now. And in fact, if we go back and look, and in fact I have gone back and looked, we were warning of this. And so that's why I just asked the question, when it appears to me that perhaps the top budget increase from 13 to this year, that next to the top is the mayor's office. I just wanted to make sure I understand what priorities are, and I realize that you'll have to go back and look at it and whatnot. But Chair, thank you for indulging me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. It's noted. Council Lady Allen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Debbie, for being here. Just to clarify, the PIP fund is kind of gone but redistributed amongst the departments that it affected. Is it going to continue, or has it ended?
There is no PIP fund this year.
Gotcha.
I don't know about the future.
Okay. Okay, and then there are a number of very worthy nonprofits that are funded in the back under what's called an administrative fund. Does that come through your office, or who evaluates how much is given to each of those?
That I should know is the process. I'm glad to find out that for you as
Okay,
well.
or Talia may have an answer.
Director Lomax O'Neill.
Yeah, in terms of the direct appropriations, we placed a information on a website this year asking nonprofits to submit their requests by February. The date was back in February. And over the past few months, each one of those nonprofits were brought in, and we met with those, and the mayor vetted all of those requests. And what you see before you are his recommendations. You will see that some of those appropriations are flat from last year. You've got a couple that have gone down, and then there were several new nonprofits that submitted requests that, quite frankly, we didn't have the availability to fund those. But we can provide you a list of everyone that's submitted by that date if you're interested in seeing it.
That's something I would be interested to see, and perhaps some of the data that was used to evaluate whether they had fulfilled their missions the previous year. So that's the mayor's office, but, okay, thank you, that's very helpful. And then back to affordable housing, which is one thing that your office has done a phenomenal job of. Can we use, everyone always says, why don't we use metro property, put affordable housing on? Can we use school property for that? Is that a question that's fair to ask?
I would think, I know Adrian's here, if there's any.
Okay, that may be an Adrian question.
Adrian?
Thank you, Council Lady. Adrian Harris, Mayor's Office of Housing. Yes, we've evaluated Metro-owned properties, infill lots, as well as Metro school property. It's a separate process, so we've been trying to do what we can just with the Metro surplus properties.
Gotcha. But if someone surplus to school property, for example, you would be notified of that and given the opportunity to say whether your office was interested in it?
That's right. We have been in the past.
Okay, good to know. Thank you very much. And then final question. Just following up on Councilman Glover's question, and this again may be Talia. I always go back to those pie charts at the front to sort of see how the distribution between public safety, education, and general government is comparing. So, I mean, maybe the comparison, not just percentage growth of those little pieces, but how those three pieces of the pie compare with 2014 would be useful information just in terms of evaluating the priorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Lady. Council Lady Dow.
Thank you, and thank you for being here. A lot of my questions have been answered, but one question I still had, I noticed on several of the positions that's allotted to the mayor's office, I was wondering, are any of those salaries funded through any type of grant or other programs?
Yes, I know of one is the Office of Resilience. That's a grant position. And I should, Donna, is that?
Yeah, that would be
That would be that would be it.
Is that the only one?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I was thinking there was more than one.
And that was I think a 2-year grant.
And I was thinking, so is the financial empowerment, I was thinking at one time we approved some type of grant funding for part of the salaries, our position for that.
Is that the?
Yeah, at what time? At one time, but that has expired.
So the grant has expired and now we're absorbing the salaries on that?
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yes.
So are you able to, because I like how the listing is, but it doesn't really give me, and I'm speaking about your organizational structure. I too, as Councilman Glover and all of us we've gotten tons of emails about making sure this budget season, since we're at a status quo budget, that we have our priorities in order. And the priorities are, from what I see, is public safety for my constituents. And so we want to make sure that we're being good stewards. I would like to see an org chart from this office, a little more detail with the positions under each.
All right.
And what positions are filled and which ones are open, that we don't have anybody in those positions. And are there plans with Eric's departure to replace the Chief Resilience Officer, or is there any opportunity to combine that with something else?
I think that is something that the mayor, will be looking at. I think obviously there is a commitment to resilience, and I think there is that CRO position. So I think that Eric is here for 2 more weeks, so we're going to be looking at that obviously very shortly.
Okay, and also on the, are you able to provide me some more information about the financial empowerment, like what that org structure look like, salaries and wages, and where it's dispersed out to as well on that?
The Financial Empowerment Center grant?
Yeah, because it was my understanding that the salaries at one time for that was part of a grant program that funded that, and I wasn't aware that it's expired now, so we're paying for this program to run now, is what I understood you saying.
The program is run through, yes, that's right.
So we're covering the salaries of the financial empowerment manager, is that right? And do we have a financial empowerment manager? Because that was a position that was previously held by Mr. Cole, I thought, and he went over to the Chief Resilience Officer.
Right, and then John Murphy has been in that position, and he has just left He has been recruited by a financial empowerment organization, national organization, and so the plans are that FTE is there, that obviously if the work continues, we'll need to have someone in that position.
And also, I see on here that there's like an assistant to the financial empowerment person. Was that on here? I think there was the manager, and it was 2 staff positions, I was thinking.
The one position that we had focused on financial empowerment was our senior advisor for economic inclusion, which was John Murphy. And it may be listed somewhat different in here, but I think if we can get you an org chart and show you what that is, that maybe would
That would be
clarify.
great. And what's open and available, because I see a little bit of overlap just from where I am, and I noticed that several of these positions are open with people matriculating, as Councilman Cooper said, to other departments and everything. And I do know that people want us to operate more efficiently, and they want to see, less executive level, more of their money spent on the ground with tangible things that they can see and feel. So I just want to make sure that I understand what we have open, how these salaries are funded, where we have overlap, and make sure that we're operating in the most efficient way possible. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Council Lady. Council Lady Henderson.
Thank you, Chair Vercher. I concur with Council Lady Dowell. I think that would really be helpful to understand the org chart of kind of, who reports to whom and so forth. I appreciated that you shared there were 30 mayor's office positions in the dean administration, now 32. In the same spirit of kind of that org chart and understanding how things work, could you share with us the top 3 paid positions in the mayor's office?
I will be glad. I think that would be probably the mayor, the COO, and the chief of staff. Is that right? Probably, Donna?
So that's Mr. Riebling and yourself?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And Mr. Riebling is the highest paid person in the mayor's office, is that correct?
I think
I don't have that.
I don't have that in front of me, but we can also provide that for you, because that's all open records, of course.
Yeah, Ms.
Okay.
Dale, I asked that, make sure you're tracking the requests so we can make sure that we get this out on the repository for all council members.
Okay, I appreciate that. And as well, in looking at your budget, kind of other services operating compared across the last few years, I think we've all had a fairly public discussion about the bump in travel tuition and dues line item that went up to $65,000 in financial year 2017, back down to 41 this year. And then y'all are budgeting a 12% increase there to get that back up to 46,800. Is that correct? So you're funding a little more into travel for next year?
Yeah, that's part of the chief strategy officer's budget that's being transferred.
Okay, anticipating his travel?
Yes.
Okay. And then in communications, I noticed you have about 6% more there, $3,000 more in communications. What is that anticipating?
Those are all the CSO's budget. That was his budget in the public investment plan.
Okay, so the increases that we're seeing here, whether 5,000, 9,000, so forth, that is just taking that position and the anticipated travel, communications, and other expenses from that position, moving it from PIP funded to budgeted.
Yes.
And so those other expenses at $10,000, that's the same. What do we anticipate those other expenses to be?
Let's see. Software, office supplies, hardware, telephone, cell phone.
Okay, thank you. All right, those are my questions. Thank you, Chair Vercher.
Thank you, Council Lady. Council Lady Hurd.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it, and thank you all for being here. And I'm thanking you also for your patience and indulgence, because I'm not a real budgetary person, but I just have some questions that concern me. And still keeping with the status quo budget, It's a couple things that I'm concerned. I wanted to ask. There is a expenditure for the Knowles home for $2 million. And I recall when we met with them that they had spoken about keeping the center, the Knowles Center, in the Bordeaux, North Nashville community. But yet, earlier in this year, it was said that they did not see North Nashville as a viable location for a new place. So I'm wondering if we still plan on giving them $2 million for that purpose when they said they were going to do something and now they're saying they're not. So I need to know if that's still on the plate. I also want to know, I guess all of this comes around with accountability, because I know that there was also funds appropriated to the Nashville Career Advancement Center that eventually gone to Goodwill for construction readiness and driver's license restoration, and there's no driver's license restoration program there, but the money was given, and I don't know if you all have any kind of accountability for those programs, being that they received it for that purpose and it's not being used. Then I saw in here that there was a GSD transfer stadium for $3.2 million. Is that for the Tennessee Titans stadium, or what stadium is that? Do you know?
No, and I'm writing a list. These, I think, are bigger budget questions that relate to the budget that I don't have that information, but I'm glad to. Excuse me.
Councilmember, those are not related necessarily to the mayor's office budget, but if you want
Well,
me
it
to
just says administrative, and I thought it started there.
That's fine. I can real quickly run through those if you want me to.
Please.
Okay. In terms of the Knowles home, we are currently acting in good faith based on the contract that is currently in place.
What about them? Are they acting in good faith?
We have our staff out there all of the time communicating with them, but we just continue to communicate. And I can't tell you today what the exact next step will be on that, but we continue to work with the legal department in terms of services at that site. If you may recall, we put in $1 million in the current year budget for them, and then later on in the year, we had to come back to you for a supplemental appropriation for an additional $1 million.
Right, but I know that they had talked about making sure, I specifically asked if they were going to stay in the North Nashville community, and particularly Bordeaux, and they said that they would. But now they are saying in some document that they did not find that area to be viable.
Okay, I have not seen that document, so I can just promise you today after.
Oh yeah, go to Channel 5 News, because they have it and it was listed there.
Okay.
All right, Council Lady Hurt, what we'll do, we'll get those questions captured for the respective department, and we'll get them put on the SharePoint.
Okay, let's see. I also wanted to know that if we engage with the department heads and ask them. I had a department head come to me yesterday and indicated that he did not necessarily need a raise, but he's got people that are working in that department and have worked for 30 years and making $25,000 and $30,000, and they need a raise. And I was just wondering if we spoke to them to see what their priorities were, as opposed to us saying generally that there's not going to be a raise. And if we would just look at that, because I know there was a survey that said that you got to make $73,000 now to afford to live in Nashville. So those people who don't make that, I'm just wondering if we looked at any other way to try to help take care of the people that took care of Nashville. And for instance, like with this resilient officer and the resilient office, I'm not exactly sure what they do, but since we are losing our very competent and dear employee, that money's that's there, could that money be used to help take care of some of those people that have given their lives working for Metro, but yet still at a less than adequate salary.
And that is a position that is a grant-funded position, but I think hearing what you're saying, yes, I have made notes. I don't know if there's any other response. Tally?
Council Lady Hurt, further along in the process, council members, you're going to receive a reallocation of fund sheet. We're not going to do the wish list this budgetary year because of the status quo. So if you feel necessary that you want to reallocate funding from various vacant positions, you will have an opportunity to express that. At this point in juncture, as it relates to the budget process, the decision is really on us. We have the mayor's recommended budget. We're going to go through our hearings, and we're going to do the best to make sure that, as a council, our priorities are in line with the community's priorities, and that's education and public safety.
Well, I'm so glad you said that's the reason why I'm asking those questions,
Absolutely.
so I can get an understanding, and I think that's the end of my
that's
question.
what we're going to do.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Council Lady. Councilman Mendez.
Thanks. I think this was going to be a question for Talia, so I'll wait a second.
Council Lady Johnson, come on now.
She was talking. Was there a question?
There was about to be. Thanks. So I've got pulled up on my computer the operating budget proposal from fiscal 16 and fiscal 19. And I guess this is for the SharePoint, just to get confirmation that I'm reading this the right way. And so I understand fiscal 16, it was 30 FTEs, and the amount from the GSD general fund for personal services was roughly 2.7 million. In fiscal 16, and the same thing now for 32 positions, 2 more positions is up from roughly 2.7 to roughly 3.9 million. And so I guess, so, you know, one of the things that we hear in the community is that the salaries have exploded in the mayor's office, and I think it's worth there being an explanation at some point about, is that right, 2 more positions and 50% more salary in that couple of years, and what the explanation is for that?
I understand the question. I'll work with Ms. Mason on getting it compiled for you.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Councilman. Councilman Glover.
I'm going to expand that question just a bit more. If we look at FY18 to FY19, 3.7, almost 3.8 on personnel, and then it's moved to 3.9, a 4.14% increase in salaries with the same number of people, when we've told the employees around town, sorry, no cost of living adjustment. I think I would like to hear the answer to how that occurred also, please. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Councilman. That's noted as well. Seeing no other council members seeking recognition, thank you so much. Press your button, Council Lady Hurt. Council Lady Hurt.
I apologize.
Not a problem.
But I don't think my question was answered if the department's head has been communicated with or counseled in determination on when you made the decision about no more raises.
I would also I know there have been communications between the mayor and staff with department heads. I was not in those communications outside of sharing some things. I don't know if there's any Talia or anything, or I'll be glad to see what I can find out.
We were in constant deliberation with the mayor ever since he walked in the door in terms of.
No, I'm speaking of the department heads, those individuals who were willing to forego raises themselves to make sure that their employees had them.
Okay, and I don't know if that question was asked of department heads. I would have to ask Shannon Hall, who's the HR director, if that was a question posed to them. I'm not aware of that she even asked that question.
So was there any discussion with those department heads as it related to the budget?
No, not that I'm aware of.
That's it, Council Lady Hurt? Okay. Seeing no other council members seeking recognition, thank you so much, Ms. Dale Mason, for representing the mayor's office, and thank you for the work that you do for our great city that we all love and serve. The next department coming up will be the Department of Finance,